Welcome to the Profile Corner. Today's video is the second half of part 9, optional sub-bases and bases for woodworking routers. Today's video talks about special bases for trim routers or palm routers that give you additional capabilities beyond what's built into those types of routers. For example, here is a $50 Bosch guide that works with both the PR20 EVS router as well as this battery operated GKF 18V-25 router. What it does is allow you to insert a bit in. Typically, it's got to be a very small bit. As you can see here, the opening is quite small. The opening in the base measures exactly 3/4 of an inch, so you'd be quite limited in terms of the types of router bits you'd be able to insert into here. They would probably have to be 5/8 in diameter or smaller. So you would probably more than likely only use flush trim bits or those types of bits that are quite small in diameter, such as a 1/2 inch diameter V-groove bit or a 1/4 inch diameter round nose bit or a 1/4 inch diameter spiral cutter bit. So Bosch has these tilt bases. I went out on eBay and I found a source for a tilt base for a Porter cable router like this one here. I have 3 of these. This is a 7301 and this would fit right down into here once you've taken off the base, and I've already removed the base from this one. There's the base for it. So that would fit right down inside of here, and then it would be secured in place using the standard screw that would be used to secure it into the regular base. These out on eBay, ones that are in very good shape, are selling for right around $50. I was able to find this one in addition to another base style that we'll cover in just a moment. This set was $50, but it's missing a key component that I'll talk about in just a minute. You'll be able to find these out on eBay as well. Okay, so this is a tilt base that we just looked at. This other base style is actually an offset base. So down inside of here, there's a little belt that drives a collet that's over here. So this would give you routing capabilities up close to a corner. It would be probably most typically used for doing flush trimming operations of laminate or wood surfaces to other wood surfaces. This particular base cost right around $100 on Amazon, and it does have some nice features to it. In addition to using flush trim bits, which would be the primary usage, it also comes with this little bearing guide, which would mount on the bottom here, that would then allow you to use regular straight cutter bits without bearings on them if you're able to mount this onto the bottom. The big drawback of this type of offset router base is that you're not able to adjust the height of the bit. The collet in here is not able to move up and down. There's a Makita version of this that also has a similar limitation. The Porter cable style, which is what this is. This is a style that works with that Porter cable trim router. This is supposed to have some up and down movement of the router collet. I wasn't able to get that working real well. And as a matter of fact, when this arrived, the bearing that's up inside of here was actually seized, and I wasn't able to turn this at all. I've got it freed up, but it's missing a key feature. As you can see here, this also has a black drive belt down inside, but there's nothing that came with this kit that actually drives that belt. So it was missing that key feature. I'm able to find a source for that gear. It's about $24 on one of the sites on the internet that sells replacement parts for routers and other old hardware such as table saws. So I might get that if I find that I would ever use this for any purpose. I'd probably also have to replace the bearing because it is still making a grinding noise in there. So once again, here's the unit for the Bosch. This drive belt that's down in there is about half as thick as the one that's in the Porta-Cable unit. You're only supposed to use this offset base a maximum of 10 minutes at a time because it tends to heat up. There's also another limitation. Your router may have a button that you can press to lock the collet in position so that you can use a single wrench to loosen up a bit that's in the collet. Well, you can't use that button when you're using this particular base. You have to use this button on top to actually lock the collet from turning so that you're able to put the router bit in. Okay, so I've got the gear drive for this offset base mounted onto this battery operated router. I had to remove the original collet. That collet is sitting here on the workbench right here. Whereas with a Porta-Cable unit, you're supposed to take the collet off of your router and then put it onto this unit right in here. Whereas with a Bosch unit, you don't have to do that. They do make these offset bases for a variety of other routers. I believe that there's a Milwaukee, a Makita version. There's probably a DeWalt version as well. Most of these are designed, once again, for doing laminate trimming work, which is why I've got a laminate trim bit mounted in here. This is supposed to have a little bit of adjustment in terms of the height. It's not a whole lot. So you've got to choose wisely in terms of what router bit you have extending out of this. You wouldn't want to use a really long bit because then you'd have a lot of that bit exposed. And as you can see here, this originally had the capability of installing a unit like this, the bearing guide, on the bottom of this so that you could use a router bit that doesn't have a bearing on the end of it. Okay, so you probably won't use these too often in woodworking, but there are some special cases where they might come in handy. Give me a moment here, and I'm going to move a couple things around, and I'll show you one application for a tilt base. That's this base right here. I'll put this router into it, and then we'll try out something here. Yeah, I have the tilt base installed on the PR20 EVS router, and just like with the fixed base, there's a triangle here, and you need to make sure that it's pointed at the lock icon, otherwise this base could change position, and I don't have it quite in the lock position just yet, and now it is. And then you can clamp this down. I have a 45-degree bit installed in here, and this base is tilted at probably about a 25-degree angle. I just wanted to try a quick experiment. using this router before we use it for anything serious. And by the way, the tilt base for the porta-cable trim router has a slightly wider opening than the tilt base for the Bosch router. It's about 1/8 of an inch wider. It still is probably too narrow to be able to use any of your normal edge profiling bits, but it might give you some opportunity for experimentation. Okay, I have the test board that we used in the last video, and what I've done here is I've drawn in the word "the" on it. I have the bit set up in here. This is the same 45-degree bit that I showed you earlier, and I have the base tilted at the same angle. Now what I should be able to do is just run this, and we should get a neat profile. You gotta make sure that we're holding it the same way. Okay, so one application of the tilt base could be to give you additional router profiles that you wouldn't normally have with the router bits that you already have here. So this is an example where I just used it for tracing out some letters. Earlier, when I was experimenting with it, I had the bit set a little bit deeper, and you can see here that the profile is almost vertical right here, and yet it's quite angled right there. So that's a neat thing that you can do with a tilt base. It's probably not worth $50 for that tilt base to have this capability, but let's take a look at a real world application for this. Okay, I have a flush trim bit installed. I've changed the angle of the base to about 10 degrees off of 90, so it's actually at about 80 degrees. And what I've got here is a shelf. Install the front board on it at a 10-degree offset from 90 degrees. A designer or somebody may decide to do something like this at some point. And what they'd like to do is to have it not with a square edge here, but with an edge that mates up with this surface. So we would have to back bevel this to match this surface of this board. That would be pretty difficult to do unless you had a tilting router table or something like that. Anyway, here's what we'd like to do. We'd like to have this back beveled. I don't have a router bit that has a 10-degree bevel on it, which might work, and so I'll be using, once again, this inch-long flush trim bit. This is a brand new bit. It should be just long enough to cut through the board here. Okay, now I have to route this, it looks like in this direction here, so we're ready to go. that did work. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. And I think we'd be able to sand that down so that it's perfect. As you can see on this end, it matches up perfectly. And there's an ever so slight difference here. But we may be able to fine tune that by slightly adjusting this base from the angle that I've got it set at. But that's close enough for us for this test. Okay, so now I've got to find an application for this 24-inch long shelf, and actually I do have one for propping up some equipment in my basement. Okay, for the offset base, you need to take off the collet on the end of the motor and put on the gear that's supplied with the offset base. Here's the drive belt that's down in there. What we need to do is we need to slide this in just like normally. Okay, so you need to line up the double arrows on the base with the double arrows on the motor. And it goes in just like that. Make sure that the clamp is loose. Okay. You need to turn it. And then it slides down. Now, what we need to do is we need to get a screwdriver up in here, and we need to guide that belt around the gear. Okay, so I've got the belt into position. Doing it in front of the camera is a little bit difficult, but putting it down onto the workbench made it really easy. Okay, so I've got this on there. I need to make sure that it's in position, and then I can lock the base down. Okay, so I've got the base locked down now. Now if I were to plug in the battery, okay, turning it on should cause the collet here to spin. And the collet just fell off. So that you never want to tighten down a collet all the way. If you don't have a bit in there, you could end up damaging the collet, and that's why it flew off. I'll grab the collet, and then we'll continue. And while I have the collet off, the collet that's provided with this offset base is right here. You can see it's quite a bit shallower than the standard rudder collet. So you do have to be kind of careful in terms of when you're inserting the bits to make sure that you get them in far enough so that they're fully seated in the collet. And by the way, there's no adjustment on the height of the bit with this particular offset base. Okay, when you're installing the bit in the offset base, once again, you need to make sure that you're not using any kind of a lock that's built into the router, but instead you're using the button right here to lock the collet in position so that you could use a wrench to tighten up the bit. Okay, so there's the bit installed, and as you can see, it's sticking out quite a distance here. which means that you don't have many options other than to take a full depth cut. So you wouldn't, if you had potentially a small flush trim bit, you could install that if you need to take a small pass, and then you could go to a larger and larger bit as necessary. But this would allow you to get up very close to some sort of a profile. If I recall correctly from reading the manual, you're able to take this black piece off, and that would get you ever so slightly closer with the router bit. So if you're doing laminate or something like that with this particular offset base, you might be able to get within a ½ inch of a surface, and then you would be able to clean up the rest of that using a file or something like that. Or potentially, maybe even getting in there with a tilt base to do a little bit of profiling. That may be a little bit more challenging for you. Bosch does sell a set with an included router like this router here, this tilt base, the offset base, and also an edge guide. I believe they're selling for about $230 right now on Amazon. Whether or not that's a good deal, I don't know. You may not find too many applications for an offset base and a tilt base in woodworking, but there may be some occasions when they would come in handy. Okay, by the way, I also want to say that today is March 29th, 2025. Today, Panther Router announced that they've released their variably spaced half-blind dovetail system. That's a system that they've been working on apparently since roughly 2017. They've released it. I believe that the starting price is right around $140, and it includes a lot of functionality in it. If you want their new 10-degree angled dovetail bit, that'll add an extra $40 onto it. Hopefully, once I get that kit here, I'll be able to show you it in operation. It has a lot of neat functionalities, such as being able to use not only a 10-degree ½ inch wide dovetail bit, but you can also use a variety of other size dovetail bits with it and make perfect looking half-blind dovetails. One other item to note is that in the last video, I tried to use this Woodhaven offset base with a trim router, and the screws were protruding out somewhere around a 1/64 of an inch, or maybe a little bit less than that, and it was scratching up the surface. I did take a countersink bit, and I went down into each of these holes, and I managed to get the drill head, I managed to get the screw head so that it's not sticking out. And so now it should work. I did not test it with the router yet, but it looks like this might be helpful to provide a lot of stability to the router when you don't want to lose the small form factor of a trim router, or a palm router for that matter. Okay, so that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.